Okay, so hello and welcome to CS303 operating systems. Today we are going to start chapter number 1 of the textbook, which is titled Introduction to Operating Systems. So as mentioned, the textbook that we will follow is Operating System Concepts, Silber, Schatz, Calvin and Gagne, and 9th edition. So although the slides over here mention 2013, but we have looked at content that has come in the older editions, and we've added that content to the slides as well. So now we start with chapter number 1, which provides an introduction to operating systems. Okay, so now I'm on slide number 2. So you can see how the slides are named by checking out the footer of each slide. So it's 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, right? So the first digit is a chapter number, and the second digit after the decimal is a slide number. Okay, so chapter 1, slide 2. So the title is chapter 1 introduction, and this slide tells us what we are going to be discussing in this chapter. Okay. So first thing is what operating systems are and what they do, right? So how exactly do we define an operating system? What are its what exactly is an operating system, and what are the goals of an operating system? So once we know what it is and what the goals are, then we can better appreciate how it has been designed. Okay, so what an OS is and what an OS does. So we'll be using the term OS very frequently, just an acronym for operating systems. Second thing, we'll do a very brief background of computer system organization and architecture. So this is from your previous course. So we won't be spending too much time on it, but we'll do a very quick background just to sort of revise some of the critical points in that course, which will be of use in this particular course. Third thing we'll look at is operating system structure. So how can we break down an operating system into various parts? As we discussed last time, the OS is a huge piece of code. Therefore, to analyze it, to study it, it would make sense to divide that the whole OS into small parts, and then try to analyze and figure out the functionality of each part. So all that comes under operating system structure, parts of an OS. Next is operating system operations. So what are the tasks performed by each of those parts, right? So there's a whole module which looks into process management, another one looking into memory management and storage management, and then protection and security. So at once, from this bulleted list, you can get a pretty good idea of one of the major goals of an operating system. It is to manage various resources of the computer, to manage the memory, to manage the storage, and to manage how all the applications are running on the machine. So we will talk more about it. Next, we will discuss some computing environments. So for example, the traditional environment in which we use a desktop or a laptop and so on. Then another environment is a mobile environment. So the main point over here is, as the computing environment changes, so will the design of the OS, right? So finally, we conclude by talking about open source operating systems. Okay. So this essentially is a roadmap of chapter number 1. Okay. Now I am on slide number 3, and the title of the slide is Objectives of chapter number 1. Okay. So each chapter will have an objective, or rather a list of objectives associated with it. Okay. So what are the objectives of chapter 1? To describe the basic organization of computer systems and the role of interrupts in a computer system. So if we take any computer system, what are its what are its major components, how are they organized, and very briefly, how do they interact with each other, and also talk about the role of interrupts. Okay. So again, this is again a very brief introduction to computer organization. Next objective is to give a tour of the major components of operating systems. Okay. So what are the different parts, and we learn more about them. So in this chapter, keep in mind that we will have only an introductory discussion, and in depth, all the concepts and everything is going to be covered in the later chapters. So we'll sort of just define what process management is, and then we'll have couple of chapters, maybe 2-3 chapters dedicated totally to how an operating system manages processes. Okay, so here we'll just introduce and define the things. Yeah, we'll illustrate the dual mode operation of an OS. So how this dual mode offers a certain level of security in an operating system. We'll learn about that. To discuss how an OS is used in various computing environments. So in a traditional environment, in a mobile environment, multimedia environment, laptop, peer-to-peer environment, real-time environment, and so on. And finally, to discuss free and open source operating systems. So we'll spend a couple of slides on that. So these are the learning objectives of chapter number 1. Okay, so now I am on slide number 4. So note that now the naming of the slides has changed. So the previous slides which we were discussing were made in an earlier version of PowerPoint, and many new features were not working. So we imported all those slides to a newer version. So now the naming of the slides has changed. Now we have numbers as 1, 2, 3, 4. So the numbering has changed. Earlier it was 1.1, 1.2, and so on, and now it is 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so the slide numbering has changed. Okay, so now I am on slide 4. Some famous operating systems, right? So we probably know the answer to all of these questions. So what are some famous operating systems for desktops and laptops? So we already know. For Microsoft Windows, we have 95, 98, 2000, XP, Vista, 7, 8, 10. So as we move from left to right, we are talking about newer and newer versions of the operating system. And for Ubuntu Linux, Trusty Tar, Xenius, Xeras, and so on. Apple's Mac OS, Cheetah, Puma, Jaguar, Tiger, Leopard, Snow Leopard, Yosemite, El Capitan, Sierra, High Sierra, Catalina. So you can see for most cases there's a specific way in which companies like to name their operating systems, right? So Apple, if you look at the earlier ones, they were all cat species, right? And then they moved down to mountains, right? Yosemite, El Capitan, Sierra, High Sierra. Latest one, Catalina, is the name of an island on the Californian coast. If you look at Linux, again they also name using a certain pattern. They are versions of operating systems. So Tahar is a kind of goat, and then one quality of it, Trusty. Xeras is a squirrel, one quality of it, Xenial, and so on. Right. Windows, of course, is not much pattern you can deduce from this. So 95, 98, of course, because those are the years in which they came. Then 2000, again, year which it came. Then XP, Vista, some other pattern, and then maybe they went to numerical number 7, 8, 10, like we have for mobile operating systems. So likewise, we have OS versions for servers also. Windows Server, Red Hat Enterprise Linux Server. OS versions for phones and tablets. Android, we know that it names based on certain suites. So Jelly Bean, KitKat, Marshmallow, Nougat. So what's the name of the latest Android? Right, so what's the name of the latest Android? So I think you can go online and see. Right. And then for iOS, they are simple numerics: 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And I think the latest one is 13. Right. So likewise, now you even have operating systems for smartwatches. You got Android Wear and iWatch OS. So key thing to take away from this slide is operating systems are of various kinds, various sizes, various functionalities, right? Depending on the use case, the application. So desktop OS would be different from a mobile OS. A mobile OS would be different from a watch OS. So if you pause and think about it, how would they be different? So in a mobile, you at once know that it's a bit cheap compared to, or it can be cheap, many of them compared to desktops or laptops. So the hardware capabilities may not be as great, and therefore the functionality may not be as good as it is for servers or desktops. Although that is quickly changing. For watch, even more so, its hardware is even less capable, and so you cannot implement very sophisticated algorithms on that. At the same time, the functionalities can be different. What you need from a desktop OS is different from what you need from a mobile OS. That is different from what you need from a watch OS, right? So for example, for a watch OS, the main functionality could be to just sort of mirror whatever is being displayed on the mobile phone, right? So again, depending on the scenario, we have a different kind of OS. So more details we'll of course be looking at later. Okay, so now I am on slide 5. What is an operating system? Okay, slide 5. What is an operating system? So simply put, one way you can define an OS is a program that acts as an intermediary or mediator between a user of a computer and the computer hardware. Right. So what you have is, at the lowest level, you've got the computer hardware, and what kind of components do we have in the hardware? We've got our CPU, we've got our memory, we've got our various I/O devices, and on the top you have the user, that needs to run some programs. So in between the user and the hardware sits the operating system. As you already know, it's a software layer, and it acts as a mediator between the user of a computer and the computer's hardware. Okay. What are the goals of an OS? To execute user programs on the user's behalf, right? So whenever you double click on a web browser, you want a certain thing to be done. You want a web browser window to open, and then in that you will type in a web address, and then when you click enter, you would like a particular website to be visited, and then you interact with that and so on. So using your gestures, whether using a mouse or using a touch screen, you interact with the application, and then what the OS will do is, on your behalf, it will execute that application or user program. Okay. It will make the computer system easy to use. So this is from the user's point of view. As we soon see, when a program is executing, a lot of activities are happening. It's a very complex operation. But one of the main goals of an OS is to abstract that, to hide all that complexity from the users. So one of the major goals is to make the computer system as easy as possible to operate. So that is one major goal. Third goal, to use the computer hardware in an efficient manner. So generally you will have let's say 4 CPUs, right, on a machine, and you may have 20-30 programs that need to run. So what that tells us is, obviously the resources would need to be shared among all the user programs, right? So because at any point of time you just cannot accommodate all of the user programs. So therefore it becomes very important that all your hardware resources which are necessary to execute user programs, they are used in a most efficient manner. So there should be algorithms in place which ensure that your hardware resources are used very efficiently and shared properly among competing processes. So that's another goal of the OS. Okay. So execute user programs on the user's behalf, make the computer system easy to use, and use the computer hardware in an efficient manner. Okay. So note that some of these goals may inherently be conflicting. There may be a trade-off. So one example is ease of use may come with a side effect of less than optimal resource utilization. So we'll soon see in chapter 2 there are two ways in which we can interact with the computer system. One is using command lines, which you may have already done in your intro to programming course. Other is using the graphical user interface. So generally, if we compare the two, if we ask a bunch of people, they will say that using the graphical user interface is a lot more user friendly. Right? So it's a lot more easier to use. But the flip side is that it consumes a lot more resources as compared to a command line argument. Okay, so you can see here you can see one of the trade-offs. If you make things easier to use, you're also using more resources. So there's a trade-off. So just like with other engineering problems, you have to balance multiple conflicting goals. Okay. So you should try to come up with an algorithm that makes a system easy to use, at the same time also optimizes on the usage of resources, hardware resources. Okay, so now I am on slide number 6, and it is titled Computer System Structure. Okay, so computer system structure. So what's the role of an OS in the overall computer system? So we can see there are various layers. In the next slide we'll see all this in the form of a picture. At the lowest layer we have our hardware, right, which provides basic computing resources. So you need a CPU to execute instructions, operate on data. Your applications would be stored in memory. So you need to retrieve them from memory, bring them to the CPU, and then the results that you get, you may have to write them back to memory. So memory is another resource. The memory will not be enough to accommodate all the applications and their data. So you need a form of secondary storage, which is a disk. And then you've got a bunch of I/O devices which you deal with, like your monitor or your keyboard or your mouse. So at the lowest layer you've got all this hardware which provide basic computing resources, right? Resources which all of your applications use to execute. Above the hardware sits your operating system, which controls and coordinates use of hardware among various applications and users. So you've got a bunch of users, right? You've got a bunch of applications, and they're sharing all the hardware resources. So the job of the operating system is to coordinate the use of those resources and to also control their usage. Okay. So need to remember that. Next you have in the list you have hierarchy, you have application programs. So they define the ways in which the system resources are used to solve the computing problems of the users. So these just correspond to different applications or apps, as we say. So here we have word processors, web browsers, database systems, video games, WhatsApp, Facebook, and so on. So each of those are examples of applications or application programs. Okay. So each has certain goal which can be different from the other, right? And then on top you have the people using the machines, which are the users. So in this way you can sort of have the overall computer system in a hierarchy. Okay, so now I am on slide 7, which shows an abstract view of various components of a computer. Okay, so it says abstract view because a lot of detail is being hidden, right? So we'll cover a lot of that later. So you can see at the lowest layer you've got the hardware, right, on which your applications directly run, right? CPU, memory, I/O devices. And then you have the OS sitting in between, and then you've got the application programs, your compilers, web browsers, all kinds of applications you have. hundreds, thousands of them, and then on the top you have users. So our major goal in this course is to study the OS layer. So what it will do is, or what it does is, regulates the use of the hardware among all users and application programs. So that, in a nutshell, is what the OS will do. Okay. So there are many ways in which one layer will can interact with the other, right? So generally, one way is using system calls, message passing, and so on. So we will be discussing all of these later. Okay. So this is an abstract view of various components of a computer system. So I hope it's clear. Okay, so now I am on slide number 8. So here we talk a bit about the goals for an operating system. So again, as with any piece of software, having the goals with us is really important, because depending upon the goals, we will based on the goals, we will appropriately design that piece of software, and OS is no exception. So the goals will dictate many policies in the design and working of the operating system. So so here, what are the goals of an operating system, right? So first, we look at the perspective from the user's point of view, right? So if we are regular users of an operating system, we interact with an OS every day. So what are our requirements from the operating system, right? What are our demands, our requirements? What would we like? So regular common users, right, want convenience, ease of use, and good performance. So we want the interaction with the operating system to be as user friendly as possible. So people can argue then that operating an iPhone or iPad is so easy that even 2-3 year old kid can do it. So definitely we do want convenience and ease of use. The interaction with the hardware, the operating system should make it as easy as possible, right? So we definitely want that, and we also want good performance. So which essentially means that our programs should run at a they should make good progress. Whenever we are running any program on the computer hardware, the program should be executed efficiently as quickly as possible. So users, regular common users at least, don't care much about resource utilization. So whether the CPU is 60% utilized or 80% utilized, they may not care that much, as long as they are getting their ease of use and they're getting relatively good performance. Okay. So that's one set of users, regular common users. Another set of users could be like scientists or students like you, uh, who are studying operating systems, doing coding, and you're doing all kinds of research and analysis and so on, right? So for that class of users, they may want something else. So there, and in that scenario, fairness would be a lot more important. So consider that our institute has an HPC system, high performance computing system. Spend a lot of money, get state of the art HPC system, high performance computing system. Now that HPC will be shared by everybody. It will be shared by all students. Whether for their homeworks or whether for the research, it will be shared among all faculty. Even people outside the institute may be given access to it. So essentially, what we have is one system being shared by large number of people. So now you see the things change. Now fairness becomes extremely important. We really don't want one user or one set of users to get monopoly over that HPC. We want to be fair to all. So perhaps one way we can implement this is that each user gets a fixed amount of time, right? After which the system goes to another user, and the earlier user has to wait. Another way we could do fairness is we could have a job queue, process queue. So anytime a user wants to submit a job, they have to enter it in the queue. So the first user to submit a job will be the first user whose job is processed. So we can look at fairness in many ways, as we'll see in the course. Uh, you also have users of dedicated systems such as workstations. So they have dedicated resources, but frequently use shared resources from servers. So this is a combination of above two options. So you have a workstation in which things like convenience, ease of use, good performance are there, and then at the same time fairness is also there. So you have systems with a combination of two options. Handheld computers are resource poor, right, compared to desktops, laptops at least, and therefore they are optimized for usability and battery life. So their battery life is extremely important. A desktop is always plugged into power, so energy efficiency may not be that important. But when you talk about even a laptop or especially a mobile phone, then you need to conserve battery life. The battery life should be extended as much as possible. So therefore, your goal becomes a bit different. So what you need is you need to use the hardware resources extremely judiciously and carefully, so that your energy consumption is minimized. Okay. So handheld computers, they need user interfaces such as touch screens, which a desktop may not have. They need voice recognition, right? So, and then at the other end of the spectrum, you have computers with little or no user interface, right, to interact with the hardware. For example, you may have a smart fridge, you have Amazon Alexa. So the only way you can interact with it is using voice commands. There is no control in which you punch something or you have any kind of touch screen there. So anyway, from this slide, what we learn is we can have different kinds of computer systems, and we can also have different classes of users, right? So depending on that, the goals from an OS would change, right? So that's essentially what this slide is conveying. Okay. Okay. So now I am on slide 9. So you can see for each slide I'm declaring first the slide number. So this is so that we'll also be distributing audio lectures. So there students can on one hand they can play the audio, and on the other hand they can have the slides open. So just for ease of synchronization, we're always mentioning the slide we're on. So slide 9, system view. So what are the goals of an operating system from the point of view of the actual computer system? In the previous slide, we looked at this aspect from the user point of view. What do they demand from the operating system? Now, what does the computer system demand from the OS? How does the computer system? So when we talk about computer system, we mean of course hardware. How does that hardware view the OS? What does it want from the OS? So system views the OS as a resource allocator. A resource allocator, so which means that we have a set of resources, hardware resources, right? CPU, memory, I/O devices, disks, so on. So it looks at the OS as a resource allocator. So allocating those resources to whom? To user programs, right? So managing all the hardware resources of a computer, right? So deciding between conflicting requests for efficient and fair resource use, right? So again, the amount of main memory that you have is limited, but you may have a scenario in which the user quickly opens up 10 windows, 10 applications. So there, the combined need of those memory needs of those 10 applications maybe too much for the amount of memory you have. So the total memory requirement may be 6 GB, whereas the memory available to you is only 2 GB. Excuse me. So in that case, you obviously cannot meet the memory requirements for all of the applications. So then, of course, you have to choose among them. Which one do you choose, right? How do you ensure fairness? How do you ensure good performance? So the OS can be looked at as a resource allocator. So to one particular program, it will say, I'll give you the CPU for, this duration. I'll give you this much memory. You know, I'll give you access to the mouse or keyboard, things like that. Right. So it allocates the hardware resources. OS is a control program, so controls execution of programs and usage of various IO devices to prevent errors and improper use of the computer. One program cannot interfere in the execution of another program. Okay, so here we ask ourselves, what is wrong if one program interferes in the execution of another program? Well, then it can potentially, change the code of that other program. It can put some, malicious code, which will, have an effect on the security, or it can just put some random code and then cause that other program to, crash or maybe not work properly. So what we need is sort of an isolation among programs. So each program, while it is running in memory, in main memory, it needs to be protected from access by other programs. So you need some sort of isolation among programs. Okay. So that is also provided by the operating system. Controls the execution of programs and usage of various IO devices. So now if you have, if you have a bunch of computers in a lab and all of them want to fire print commands and you have only one printer, so of course at any one point of time you can only process one of those commands, right? So then you'll have a printer queue, and based on that, you'll move one process at a time. Right? So it controls the execution of programs and prevents errors and improper use of the computer. Okay. So from the point of view of system, OS is a resource allocator. It allocates all the hardware resources to various user programs, and it also controls the execution of programs to ensure that there is no interference and there is no improper use of the computer. Another example of improper use is if a process gets absolute control over the CPU. It's a very long running process, say many days, and it gets control of the CPU and it's not giving the CPU to any other process. So that's another example of improper use. So again, throughout the chapters we look at the other examples as well. Okay, so now I am on slide number 10. What is an operating system? So this we've taken from another course that ran. So this is a very good slide because it tells us what an operating system actually is, right? So one of the things that an operating system is a referee. So look at this analogy, look at this example. Just like you have a referee for in a football match. So what's the goal of the referee there? To ensure that every player, every team is playing the game according to some rules, right? So you have a set of rules. Game will last for 90 minutes, and some rules for penalty and penalty corners and so on. So there are a set of rules, and it's a job of the referee to ensure that all the players they obey and respect the rules. If they don't, then of course they give them a yellow card, red card, and so on, right? Similarly, an OS also is a referee and ensures that the resources of the computer system are used among users and processes, and if some process is not doing that, then take appropriate action, right? So you have a set of rules which govern how the various hardware is going to be used, right? And it's a job of the OS to ensure that all the users, all the programs are obeying those usage rules. Okay. So manage among the many tasks in that could be managing sharing of resources. So sharing 4 CPUs among 50 processes, for example. Protection, isolation we talked about, ensuring that one process, one program does not mess into or enter into another process and tries to do something harmful. So essentially all of these things come under this referee role, right? Resource allocation, isolation, taking care of communication among processes. So it's a referee. It's also an illusionist, right? So it gives an illusion of many things. It gives an abstraction of many things. So it provides clean, easy to use abstractions of physical resources. So when we're interacting with let's say files, it makes that interaction very easy. So we just go to a folder, we see a file, double click it, we open it in a program. If you want to move files around, if you want to delete files, if you want to create a directory, right, save a file, all those tasks are all those tasks become extremely easy for the users. So the OS takes care of that. Whenever we copy, as we'll see in chapter 2, whenever we copy a file from one source to destination, under the hood, within the operating system, an extremely large number of events occur. But those are all hidden from the user, abstracted away from the user. And from the user perspective, the operation becomes very simple. Okay. So likewise, whenever we add, let's say if we are connecting our phone, or if we are connecting an external disk drive to our computer, then it makes the usage of that very easy. Once we add that disk drive in 2 or 3 seconds, we see that disk drive in desktop, and then we can open it. We can copy and paste from that. So again, what is going under the hood? Lot of code is being run, lot of activity is happening, but from the user point of view, all that is abstracted, all that is hidden. Okay. So provides clean, easy to use abstraction of physical resources, right? So whether it's CPU, memory, disk, IO devices, right? It hides away a lot of things, right? It gives us the illusion of infinite memory. So although memory is only finite, but we can write our code assuming that we have infinite amount of memory, and then the OS does some juggling on the inside. So again, we'll talk more about this in the chapter on memory management. So essentially, even if the main thing is, even if our program, its memory requirements are larger than the RAM available, our program can still run. Okay, so the OS will do a lot of optimizations. It will run a lot of algorithms to ensure that it is possible. So the advantage of this is, we know when we're writing programs, we don't need to be mindful about how much memory is there. We can write as if the memory was infinite. So it's an illusionist. And third thing is, it's a glue. So there are a lot of services in an OS. Looking at storage, right? Memory, disk, SSDs, spinning disks. We're looking at windowing systems, right? We're looking at networking, how we connect to the internet. Here again, we have various technologies: wired, wireless. We have Bluetooth, and so on. How we're sharing data among machines, how we are authorizing users to work on machines, what is the look and feel. So the OS puts glues all of these together, combines all of these components into, let's say, one part, and then makes that interaction, or that once we get that part, then interaction with it is very convenient. So an operating system is all of these three things. It's a referee, which ensures that the rules governing the usage of resources are respected and obeyed. It's an illusionist, providing clean, easy to use abstraction of physical resources, and it's a glue which takes all the services of of our system and puts them all together, and makes it very easy to use. So I think this should give you a good feel of what are the different roles of an operating system, right? Okay, so now I am on slide 11. Slide number 11, what does an OS contain? So again, this is quite debatable. There is no universally accepted answer. So one approximation you can have is, everything a vendor ships when you order an OS. So you place an order, say I want Windows. You may get a key and you download it from the web. So whatever you download is what an OS is. That's one interpretation. So this is naive and quite simplistic. This varies a lot. Some operating systems are less than 1 megabyte, like in an embedded devices or a microwave oven with little or no GUI. Others are several GBs. Windows 10 is or 15 GB. iOS for iPhones takes up to 2.25 GBs. Right. Android would be in similar range. Right. So one very simple definition is everything a vendor ships, everything you download when you order an operating system. Another theory is one program running at all times on the computer. So one program which is running at all times on the computer called the kernel or core. So let's say you turn on your machine, and before you can open any application like Acrobat or like your web browser, like your Microsoft Word, like any game or like PowerPoint. So before you open any program, whatever is running on the machine, whatever program is running on the machine, that is the OS, and that is more precisely called as a kernel or core. So the main part of the operating system. And now one by one you start opening programs. You open PowerPoint, you open Word, and so on. But those are not part of the kernel or core. Okay. So again, those are applications. Those are not part of the OS. So every other software besides the kernel or core is either a system program, right, which ships with the OS, but not part of the kernel. So we have a compiler when we are compiling code, right? We have an assembler. So those are examples of a system program. You can have a memory manager. You can have a CPU scheduler. Right? All those are system programs. And then other classes, you have application programs. So all programs not associated with the OS, for example, Facebook, Twitter. So then what you have is you have a core part of the OS which is running at all times, right? So that is called the kernel. And besides the kernel, you have two types of programs. One is a system program. Examples are compilers, assemblers, schedulers, memory managers, and so on. And the third category is application programs like Facebook and Twitter. So whenever you go to the App Store or the Play Store, different kind, whatever applications you download, those would be examples of application programs or applications or apps as we call them, right? Okay, so now I am on slide number 12, and the title for this slide is computer startup, right? So specifically here, what we are interested in is how does an operating system start? How is an operating system loaded whenever we turn on our machine, right? So you know that whenever you turn on your phone, if you've got an iPhone, that sign of an apple appears, and then after a while your OS loads. Likewise with Android, picture of a robot may appear or Android sign may appear, and then the OS loads. Similarly with desktops and laptops, same thing happens. So what exactly is going on there? Yeah. So all machines have what we call a bootstrap program. So it turns out that there is a separate program, right? That takes care of loading the operating system, and that program is called a bootstrap program. Bootstrap. Okay. So bootstrap program is loaded at power up whenever you turn on the device or whenever you reboot it. So you can also reboot a device in which you don't specifically turn it off the device, but you restart it. So in both cases, the bootstrap program runs. So when we talk about boot in context of a computer, that's not a shoe, but boot means to start. So you're saying I'm booting the machine. Machine is booted up. It means it's started. I'm rebooting the machine, which means I'm restarting the machine. Okay. So of course, this is a program. So therefore, it needs to be stored somewhere, right? This bootstrap program. So this program is typically stored in a ROM kind of memory. So ROM, I'm sure you would already know, it is a read-only memory on which only reads are allowed, which means you cannot write to that memory directly. Okay, so writes are forbidden; they're not allowed, and you can only read from it. So it actually makes sense. Why would you want to place a bootstrap program on a read-only memory? Because the job of the program is to load the OS. So if you put it on a write-enabled memory, then it's possible that by mistake or maliciously you write something else on this part of memory, and now the bootstrap program will no longer function because its code has been replaced partially or totally by some other program. Now, if the bootstrap does not function, then you are stuck because now your OS is not cannot be loaded. So sometimes that is a problem with machines, that for some reason they cannot locate the bootstrap program. Okay? And because they cannot locate it, it means those systems cannot run the bootstrap program, and which further means that the OS is not able to load. Right? So you're not able to use the machine at all. So this bootstrap program, we also call this as firmware. So a lot of articles online, you will come across this term firmware. So this is just another name for the bootstrap program. Okay. So firm means that sort of it doesn't change. So it means only once you write that bootstrap code onto the memory, and then you don't. Okay. It typically, so what's the job of the bootstrap program? It typically initializes the computer system first, right? So what does it initialize? CPU registers. So we know that from our computer organization and architecture class, CPU registers play an extremely important role. They're used to store data and instructions, right? So if you have any piece of data that you want to bring in from memory, you want to load from memory, it's transferred from memory and it's loaded into the registers. So let's say two integers, and then you perform an addition on them, and then the computer arithmetic happens, and then you put the results back on another register, right? So CPU registers are definitely a very important part of the machine. So of course those need to be initialized. If they contain some old values from a previous computation, it obviously has to be erased and initialized. Device controllers, parts, modules which are used to control the execution of devices. So we can have various kinds of devices. An external hard disk is a device. Your mobile phone is a device which can be linked up. Your digital camera which can be linked is also a device. Mouse is a device. Uh, Keyboard is a device, and so on. So you have a bunch of devices, and their execution needs to be controlled definitely. So those device controllers need to be initialized as well. Memory contents need to be initialized. So we know that whenever we talk about main memory, it is volatile, which means once the power is off, it's all put in the initialized state. So various parts of the computer system are initialized by this bootstrap program. Once that initialization happens, what the bootstrap does is bootstrap locates the operating system. So where is the operating system loaded? It's loaded on the disk, right, or on any similar kind of memory. It could be an SSD also. So it locates the operating system and then loads the kernel into memory. So kernel is just the core piece of the operating system without any system program or user program. So what it will do is now locate the OS and then load it into main memory. So because we know that any program that has to be executed, it has to be brought into the main memory for execution. You can't execute directly from disk. Okay. So locate the OS, load it onto the main memory, and now the OS is up and running. Right. So once the kernel is up and running, it waits for some user event to occur. So it could be like probably connecting to a Wi-Fi network. That process is invoked, and opening a web browser, right? So connecting to Wi-Fi network, that's probably a system program. Web browser is of course a user program, right? So to give you an example of a bootloader program for Linux, grub, GRUB, Grand Unified Bootloader. So there is a if you search for it, it has a page gnu.org/software/grub. So gnu.org/software/grub, and you can look at other sites as well, where you can find out more about this bootloader, Grand Unified Bootloader. And of course, you don't need to have one operating system. So for example, on one of my machines, I have installed two different operating systems. I've got Windows as well as Linux. So in that case, what the grub does is, when it starts running, right, it will do the initialization of the computer systems, and then before it loads the operating system, it needs to be told which one it is. So then whenever the machine turns on, I will get a drop down list in which I'll have Linux and Windows. So I can go up and down and select the appropriate operating system, whether I want Linux or Windows, and then I hit enter, and then the grub bootloader will load only that operating system and not the other one. So which is fine, because in different parts of the disk I have different operating systems permanently stored. So one chunk of the disk has Windows, another chunk has Linux. So if I select Linux, so the bootloader knows where in disk it's located, it goes there, right, and then it pulls Linux in, loads it into main memory, and starts executing it. And it does the same thing for Windows. So this is what we call as a dual boot, right? So note that dual boot is not same as virtualization, right? So once we talk about virtualization, we'll discuss this issue more. So definitely possible to have multiple operating systems, and then once you power on the device, so when you restart it, your bootloader gives you the option of picking the OS that you want to load.